One, two, one, two, one, two. What's up, people? Hotep Jesus. We back with another sharp conversation. Well, Hotep Jesus. Hope everybody has been doing well. Long time no see. I've been on a bit of a hiatus. Not Hawaii, hiatus. Been traveling a lot, but I'm back, ready to make some awesome fire content for you guys. Shout out to Dominic Mills. Said appreciate the gems, bro. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you for supporting the channel. Shout out to Raider making this happen. You're the man, Raider. You're absolutely the man. Jag, what's up, bro? How are you?
Hey, good, man. No, thanks for having me. I've heard a lot of good things and I'm excited to get a chance to speak to you.
You heard a lot of good things about me?
Yeah, I mean, I heard you're one of the more knowledgeable people in the space. And so I'm looking forward to sharing ideas and collaborating on concepts together. I mean, that's the goal here, right? Is to share knowledge and build together.
Yeah, I'm going to need you to share a lot of knowledge with me because I don't know anything. I'm just a student here. I'm going to start off with a tough question for you. Let's just start the drama up real fast. Is Bitcoin money? A lot of people argue about many different functions of Bitcoin, BTC. Bitcoin as it exists today. This is a question. I was at the Bitcoin conference a couple of weeks back, and this is a question I was asking people. Is Bitcoin money?
Well, it depends on how we define money, I guess, but maybe the concept of money might change in the near term with DeFi. But I would say in the classical definition, no, right? Because there's actually specific attack vectors on Bitcoin when it starts to try to behave like money. For one, there is, the idea of Bitcoin scaling through Lightning networks is the concept that a lot of the maximalists are throwing around. But there's not enough bandwidth on the main chain to support hearing, I guess, if you think of court cases of situations where people are stuck in their channels and need to escape because someone decided that it'd be fun to try to steal their money because they could and it's cheap or it's free. That attack is actually called flood and loot. And so you need to have enough bandwidth on the chain to support a lot of people or billions of people. And it just doesn't have that. When you're trying to...
You just alluded to the fact that people are getting their Bitcoin stolen?
Well, in the situation of a flood and loot, it's actually disproportionate how much it costs to try to flood the Lightning Network channels, to try to attack and try to enforce honest...
We're talking about layer 2.
Yeah, Bitcoin Lightning Networks. So it's not completely... resistant to all the attack vectors like layer 1, obviously, right? Because you're not running in a consensus. And so the idea is you're transacting between channels and people, and you're hopping across channels. You don't know who these people are. And so all you could do is best guess that these people are honest. But if they happen not to be, and they decide, it's cheap enough for them, they can try to force you to use the main chain to say, hey, I'm claiming balances, but then the guy isn't able to hit the main chain because A, he's priced out, and B, he just doesn't see it on time. So he has to delegate his trust to a watchtower. If the watchtower shut down, then what? So there's those attacks are really hard to overcome. There's UX challenges as well. And it's not I guess you can say it's not Web3 compliant. So Web3, very simple, easy to understand. Although I'm not a fan of designing, saying that something complex isn't good, but I would say there's it's a lot of hurdles to overcome before we can claim some sort of victory. I would say maybe with the ZK, with some ZK tech sprinkled in on the payment channel systems, it could become kind of relevant. As it stands today, I would say no, it's not money because of that.
So the opinion I've been getting from people, especially the Bitcoin conference, was that Lightning Network is actually safe, depending on, I guess, which channel you use. Is that safe to assume that there are safer channels out there, more trusted clients?
Yeah, if I guess you're transitioning trust over to someone who you think is trustworthy, so then your liquidity is fragmented based on your trust or your web of trust. And so if it's your circle, then sure, you can transact with them. If it's direct with somebody, sure. But it doesn't stop that person from turning around and becoming a bad actor if they want. So that's the whole thing with permissionless, censorship resistant technology. I can decide if I'm good one day and bad the other day, and that's why you have consensus systems overseeing that. So like, how can you solve that? You really can't. It's human fear and greed. It really is a human element that you're trying to solve there. And all you can try to do is create detriments or incentives for honest people to act honestly. But as you know, the markets aren't always rational, and so those irrational situations mean that there are certain attack vectors that are possible. And because of that, I would say it can't really be served as a global payments or currency money system if there's those attack vectors present. I mean, they can't. Maybe you can innovate, but that's where a lot of the like Metallics and some of the other guys are saying, if there's enough bandwidth on the main chain, sure, like you can parameterize it for 5 or 7 billion people, and they can all hear their case if they go off Lightning networks. Even the Lightning Network white paper stated it clearly, saying, it's not going to be to scale. It needs a bandwidth adjustment of at least 10x to scale to the population in the world if they were to do one transaction a year. But otherwise, it's going to be tough. It's not meant to scale for everyday transactions. It'll still end up being a bank-to-bank transfer at the end of the day.
So what I heard is that using Lightning Network, there is no trusted third party. I can transact with you, and there is no intermediary there. It's just a protocol. Is that correct, or am I off, or what?
There's a trust in liquidity, but there's no trust in if you are around and you can watch for your own state, then for sure it's trustless. But there is a time value associated, there's costs associated, and there's trust in liquidity, because if you're sending across a hop to somebody else, you have to ensure there's enough liquidity to pay that person. So that's where, when you're sending P2P in Bitcoin, there is no liquidity assumption. It's, I'm sending my money. But in the case of Lightning networks, if there's not enough funds in the route, it's going to go try to find another route to fund through to find enough liquidity. So there is that, that implicit trust in finding the partners to trade with. Like if you're trying to find a partner to give you a letter of credit in a bank system, not as much trust as that, but in a similar way, that they're guaranteeing some sort of liquidity through the banking infrastructure, so you can place a trade deposit to handle logistics and import export. In the same way, you're guaranteeing somebody in a trustless way that you're providing liquidity, but that doesn't stop them from turning around and say, "Oh, I'm just going to pull liquidity. I'm going to walk off because I can." that's the trade-off you get of removing consensus from that system and making it purely P2P, if that makes sense.
Basically, what you're saying is that if I'm receiving funds from somebody, I better trust this individual.
It's not. I mean, you don't have to trust them, but you should be on guard that at some he can take some other mistaken state and say that he actually owns all of the liquidity in your channel, and you have to simply challenge and say, "Nope, he didn't sign. I didn't sign. Here's how much we should be owning." So in that way, you're never going to do business with that person again once he does that. But the other person is free to do that, because there's no rounds of communication in a consensus system that ensures both people are actually signing on something, right? It's you making a signed message, transacting that privately to the other individual, them signing a message saying, "Okay, you've transferred me this amount of Bitcoin, and I acknowledge that I received that. I'm making a signature on that as well." And the main chain will confirm if that person is whoever is lying, it can easily detect. But if there's not enough bandwidth, then that's the situation where you're stuck in a mempool and you have your court case, and then their Lightning Network channel timeout expires, and then you're hooped. You've actually lost your funds at that point. So there's no real good solution to that other than optimizing, trying to reduce the transaction size, which they're doing right now, or increasing the bandwidth, which we know is not going to happen because that's a hard fork. And or just think about it as a store of value, which is really what it is. It's it's kind of at the bottom of Exter's pyramid of value, right? Like where the derivatives on top are everything else, real estate, securities, and all this stuff. And at the bottom of the stack, there's this new sort of super store value that's a Ponzification. It's a tokenized Ponzi scheme that is indestructible, and it's geared towards being that. I view it as kind of like a superstore value that ends up being at the bottom of that pyramid of value inside of our economy, and it's just a rush to own more and more. Anytime you trade above that in the derivative layer, you're actually trying to accrue more and more, stacking sats, they would say. So, just like how in today, it's probably your real estate or gold, silver, were probably at the bottom of the stack. Those are the non-synthesizable assets you can't make more of. But at the end, that's what you're trying to accumulate with as you create wealth. And in the Bitcoin universe, when hyper Bitcoinization, if it ever happens, that's kind of a situation where you're replacing that gold, silver, real estate with something even below that, which is the base value of everything inside of the economy.
Okay, explain this to me like I'm a fifth grader, because you're going way over my head when you talked about the possibility of losing funds during a Lightning Network transaction. How could that be possible?
In the flood and loot scenario, there's I think some Israeli scientists put that out from Hebrew University. I follow. The initial concept was you have Lightning Network channels, and I have to route through a bunch of people. So I don't know who those
let's
people
stop
are.
right there. Let's start right there. When you say a Lightning Network channel, anyone can open one of these up, or how does that work? I can just pop one up right now.
You can create one on your own, and you have to associate who the other end of the channel is. And so if you're paying somebody, or you finding a liquidity endpoint, you can open a channel with that person. And then anytime you make a payment, the Lightning Network's protocol is actually smart enough to figure out, okay, you've got to send from here to here. There's not enough funds. You're trying to send 100, but in the route, you've only established half of a Bitcoin. How do I actually find enough liquidity for you to get from A to B, from you to Joe? Joe's waiting to receive 2 Bitcoin from you. And so the problem is when you have to go and trust these hops for liquidity, that's a situation where the person could just stand up and walk away and say, I'm going to force you to go to the main chain to reclaim your funds. And you have, say, 7 days to do that. And if you don't do it within 7 days, it's assumed that the person who did the challenge, went to the chain and said, these are my funds, but they're not really his funds, walks away. And if in the situation of flood and loot, what you're doing is you're trying to flood a bunch of channels with liquidity and then stand up and walk away. And these are all small amounts in a way where you can, like, say 0.1, and then you have a whole bunch of those, and people start using that up. You stand up and walk away, and you force people to use the main chain. And it actually costs them more to try to say, no, that's my money. It's cost them, like, say, 0.01 Bitcoin or something like that for transaction fees. They may decide not to do that. In that case, they lose their money because the fees are too high, or they may not actually be able to hit the main chain because the transaction, the mempool actually has too many transactions in there, and you're not able to get in there within 7 days or something like this. So that's what they meant by flood and loot. You're flooding the network you're pretty much spamming the network with too many transactions in a way where you're hitting Lightning Networks trying to extract revenue. In the traditional spamming of Bitcoin, you actually don't get anything out of that, right? You're just sending money to yourself and you're spamming, you're just creating fees. If you're spamming Lightning Networks, you can extract revenue because there's these channels that you can and force people to do an action which requires main chain transactions. So in that case, when you flood that network with spam, it could actually become profitable if people can't close their channels.
Where are you extracting the profit from?
So the cost actually to the flooding event, when you're flooding the network, is actually costing you something because you have to spend liquidity. And then the loot event is when you go to the Bitcoin main chain and you are spamming the mempool so that no one else can actually hear their close their channels in a timely way. And at that point, you assume that you've walked away because they can't close their channels. If they can't close their channels, the cost of attack deducted by the profit is your actual revenue that you're walking away from.
Assuming they used your channel.
Yeah, and you set up your channel so it's something like you have 3 days or 5 days or something like that. So you're not going to set up a 15-minute one. No one's going to use you, right? But if you fit into the system and say 3 to 5 days, it's on the lower end of the spectrum, but people still use it. And the UXs are dumb enough to hit your channel, and they hit enough of them, then it becomes a point where it's actually profitable to execute this attack. And so how they combat that is smarter routing, knowing who your route is, making sure that they set enough time, assessing the Bitcoin network and making sure, okay, if there's a spam attack, I'm only going to route through channels that have a sufficient delay so that if I ever have the situation, I'll be able to hit the main chain or pay enough fee. And so the algorithms and the complexity on the Lightning Network side of the client side gets exponentially harder and harder. But still, in some situations, there will always be some sort of revenue. Like there will always be that corner case where the fees start to go down again, and then all of a sudden it's profitable to execute this attack again. And since it's profitable, you'll always find someone wanting to execute this strategy, right? Because it's always, at some point, it's always going to be profitable. It may not always be profitable, but it will, at some point, it's always profitable. And that's when you'll see the leeches and the hackers try these sort of things. Now, how profitable? It becomes more profitable as more people use it. So, right now, if you ask the Lightning Network devs, it's not safe because the protocols are just too immature and not enough Lindy effects have been in it to assess that there can't be any attacks. But I think Bitcoin people are a little bit reluctant to put more money compared to the DeFi world, where people just put stuff out and it starts being used. So with a grain of salt, it's the Bitcoin, when they say not to use it, it's probably like it has to be bulletproof before they would say that they should use it.
Well, what would a Bitcoiner fan of Lightning Network say to rebuttal what you mentioned in regards to some of the threats, like the flooding technique, et cetera, because they talk highly of this network, they talk highly of its security, and they act as if there's nothing wrong.
Yeah, I mean, like, just think about it this way: like, you're moving off of a system that uses consensus, which removes any sort of P2P issues, and you're moving into a pure P2P system that doesn't have consensus built in. So where's the trade-off? And if you boil down, if you really, really dig into it, the trade-offs are on the liquidity side and the handshaking, the coordination. So because users can decide they want to pick up and leave. So if the ripple effects in a coordinated attack happen, that's the trade-off you get from moving away from consensus. Now, obviously, it doesn't scale if you have consensus, but that's what you get.
Have we seen any of these attacks?
I think when the paper was being written, they did execute these attacks because there was not enough liquidity. It was probably 2019-ish when it was written, and they executed the attacks. And then the actual news groups started to work on how to fix those solutions. I think one of the Lightning Network's engineers had a rebuttal, but the original author did not confirm. Last time I spoke with the original author or someone from the team of the original author, they said it hasn't been, they haven't confirmed an actual fix as far as I know. So what I see behind the scenes and the Bitcoin commits and the where it's going is that they're optimizing the transaction sizes. They're trying to use Mast and Taproot and Schnorr. And so they're trying to actually make it more efficient so that, with the same 1 or 4 megabytes equivalent blockchain size, you can actually start to scale up. But, I would say we're orders of magnitude off still from trying to get to 7 billion people, which is what you need to parameterize, right? And even the LN paper clearly says we're kind of off by a couple of factors. If we do want this to be used, one person does one transaction per year on the chain, and everything is off the chain. Even with that, it's orders of magnitudes off still. So we have some work to do, and I think maybe coupling ZK in there might actually, because ZK does, it takes the role of consensus almost, if you apply it properly, and that's what Ethereum guys are doing with Layer 2, using ZK to remove consensus and do computations off the chain. And that's the real cool thing. Like, I know one other team is actually doing payment channels for UTXO, like Bitcoin, using ZK, but it, it's not 100% there, but it does actually skip around some of these routing issues, because you can guarantee both private payments as well as routing kind of commitments. You're locking in the routing. So the thing is, it's a star topology rather than I can go and route with anybody. It's more of a star topology. It's a little bit different. But I would say it's, with some research, it could probably end up getting there. But in the end, right now, for me, I would look for the edge cases and the loopholes when you remove consensus. Like, what am I taking away when I go away from the Bitcoin main chain? What do I leave behind when I go into a pure P2P system?
All right, last question on Lightning Network. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds as if the channel that I pass through needs to have more liquidity than the actual transaction that's happening. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, if you have enough sufficient liquidity, you're all good, right? And you're
As
just
a channel.
direct, right? You're just P2P with somebody, and you know who you're transacting with, and you're probably doing some sort of barter or something like that. So you know the person in person physically, right? So there's usually never any issues, and you can set streaming payments with that person and transact with that person all day, and you don't have to worry. But at some point, imagine where you're sleeping and it's midnight and the guy wakes up and, you only have 3 days or something like that because you trust him in the channel, and or you go away on a vacation and there's 15 Bitcoin in there. At some point there are going to be situations where people just get away with that situation where they just hit the main chain and walk away with your funds erroneously, right? That's just inevitable.
Any amount?
No, I mean, it's whatever in your channel.
Whatever's in that channel, they have access to. Is that what you're telling me to?
If you don't go back or use a system like a watchtower to go back and fight your case, then the judge, which is the main chain, will rule in the favor of whoever touched it last. So if you say it's mine, we'll say, oh, okay, it's yours. Go ahead, take it. But if the guy comes back with the real signatures saying, no, these are the digital signatures of the last state, and this is true, that's where you're able to say, no, it's actually my coins, and I've proven it. Therefore, I go back and get my coins, my deposit back.
So I can send you 0.01 Bitcoin, and he can claim, a whole Bitcoin if he wanted to, is what you're saying.
He uses like a previous state of like, okay, I own 0.1 Bitcoin, but I sent it back to you. And so really you have it, but he's going to go back in history and say, no, I actually owned it. Here's his signature. Here's my signature. And he'll go to the chain and say, I actually own the 0.1 Bitcoin, but really you got it, right? And so when you use your commitment to go to the chain, yours is going to be after him, which you can prove without a doubt because he signed a signature after yours, right? Committing his coins back to you. And so you can easily prove that it was actually your money, but the Bitcoin network doesn't know that until they've heard your side of the story. So either you trust like a service to do it for you, and you pay a little bit of a fee, or you do it yourself, right? Your software, when it comes online, it checks and says, oh, challenge, I need to challenge this. Okay, go ahead. And that's the thing, right? So
how does all this tie into the Bitcoin philosophy of things? Does L2 Lightning Network Layer 2 solutions tie into the Bitcoin philosophy? Is it outside of Bitcoin philosophy? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not to take away the usefulness of Bitcoin. It's awesome and it's powerful. I think what Bitcoin really is indestructible Ponzi scheme. And I say that in a funny way because the world is already a Ponzi scheme, as you know. It's a destructible Ponzi scheme, right? It's at the bottom of the layers of stacks of value. There's a shifting, shifting land of fiat that you never know if it's going to be up or down. So how do you judge what value is? You really put all your money into something that cannot be, you cannot create more of. You can't synthesize. So it's not a chemical, or it's something that can be synthesized in a lab. It's something that other people value. And so that's in today's world, that's the bottom of the stacks of value. And then Bitcoin kind of comes around and says, no, I'll algorithmically create a Ponzi scheme where it'll actually be coded to actually go up and reduce supply should there be more demand. And now you can kind of see a world where there's a race towards accumulating this, because it actually takes real world resources, extracts them, and creates deterministic output out of that, deterministic value. Now, what we call that value, money or just store like digital gold, it's up to what people define it. But I think money is something you need to be able to use to barter for everyday purchases. And that's not what I think of Bitcoin. I think of it as the bottom of the value preservance stack, or the extras pyramid of value, I'd say. So there's like two things that is really important in Bitcoin on the tokenomics side, the deflationary algorithm, and then the energy consumption side, which there's a lot of problems in the government's eyes right now, but I see it as the opposite. I see it green production of energy, innovative research, chasing mechanisms to create more efficient energy production linked to real world inflation. And so now if you think of, John Nash's Ideal Money white paper, where he alluded to an asymptotically ideal money, which is, the best sort of money you can keep creating over time as humanity approaches, and the ideal money would be one where you have a deterministic output based on the growth of your ecosystem or the growth of your economy. Usually you relate that back to energy, right? Because energy is the base value of everything. You cannot synthesize it. The thing is, you couldn't monetize it too much before, and there's no fungibility between energy, but that's what Bitcoin really is. It ties energy back into value, and that's why it's so crazy in that there's a flywheel effect. Like Michael Saylor says, if you own some Bitcoin today, it's really a claim of future work. And the longer I hold, the more powerful, the more work is put behind it. So I'm actually bartering with the amount of work behind me. The longer I hold, the more secure it is. And that's, tying all of these economic philosophies together. I view both of those, the tokenomics being deflationary and Ponzi-like, and the green incentives to create energy are driving its adoption. Now, the only, I'd like to say that there's actually people that think that hyper-Bitcoinization world would lead to complete chaos. I was debating with the principal cryptographer from Google at one point. She was saying there's a red queen race. Meaning from Alice in Wonderland, like you're trying to run faster and faster to stay in the same spot. In the world of hyper-Bitcoinization, corporate finance is kind of disrupted, right? Because why would I lend or borrow or do business when I could just hold some Bitcoin and I know it's going to go up and I can accrue my revenue based on that? In that world, when everyone is just either mining Bitcoin or holding Bitcoin and corporations just stop, what happens to the consumption of energy? At that point, you have to keep consuming more energy to stay in the same spot as purchasing power wise. If I'm a company and I need to preserve my purchasing power, or I'm a person, I need to buy a loaf of bread, I need to make sure I can buy a loaf of bread tomorrow, you have to increase your purchasing power definitively. Otherwise, you'll end up in a situation where you're priced out, and that's the red queen race. But I don't totally buy into that. But I do see that in a possible universe that is true. In an alternate universe, I would say that the exponential incentive to create green energy, create new mechanisms of energy, and extract energy in a more efficient way, directly linking to a deterministic Ponzi system that will give you value. And there's no other way to do that. Even with quantum computers, you can't skip that line. that itself gives us probably something new and new ways to create energy we haven't seen yet. And that will actually breed a lot of innovation on top that we won't understand until we get there.
Okay. You mentioned transitioning the centralized world to decentralized financial systems, and obviously compliance is going to hop into that conversation. And you use the term compliance solutions. Is there solutions in compliance?
Yeah, I mean, I view people as resistant to change, and whenever there's new concepts, new kind of new disruptions, especially in the financial world, that are so vast and global, have global implications, it's always there's always some resistance. First of all, how will it work in our existing frameworks? How will we tax it? How will we catch terrorists? How will we do this? How will we do that? So I view governments taking a standoff approach from, if we can't do counterparty checks, then we need to figure out how we can attack it from an angle where you can create compliance solutions on top. And so when we spoke to enterprises, we've been doing so for years, the same questions come up, like, how do we know the SEC is not just going to stop us if we create a solution on the blockchain today, or do our solution on top, and all of a sudden they're slapping us on the wrist and we're a public company, we can't risk that. How do we, the only way really is to create those solutions for them. So in the 5 to 10 year picture, I view this as completely decentralized markets ruling the world. But in the short term, we need stepping stones. So what we kind of been working on a little bit is to figure out, how do we do transaction compliance on the blockchain with still global solutions, not isolated local, like securities ATS broker that just does security tokens in Omaha or something like that. It's more about, how can we get the whole world on a compliance solution that everyone understands, fits within everyone's boundaries of jurisdiction and regulatory compliance. So that's kind of the interesting things that we are trying to work on. There's two things kind of there. There's the first proof of concept we did with the Bitcoin stack was, we have Syscoin, which is a fork of Bitcoin with the UTXO asset layer. We created an interesting feature on that asset. When you create an asset, you can actually specify a notary agent that can sign off on every transaction. And it was important to design something that's efficient so that, you're not creating a whole bunch of overhead on top per transaction. Like, imagine you have to do like 1,000 counterparty checks on a transaction. You cannot put all that on the blockchain. It won't scale, too much data. But what you could do is have a signature check. So that's what we did. We defined a notary. That means that a transaction has to go to the notary agent in order to get notarized. And it opens up interesting avenues of payment systems, right? Like, if you think back to Lightning Networks, now you can create a Lightning Network solution where to do an on-chain transaction requires notarization. But then when you're on Lightning Networks, you can completely use the existing stack and not require any changes. You're in a walled garden payment channel system at that point, where every, in a CDBC or something like that, every person would have gotten their checks to make sure their address is compliant. So that was one avenue we were looking at, to go down the UTXO layer into Lightning Networks with potentially a compliant solution for governments. The other option we were looking at was in the Web3 world, right? Because once you have an EVM, the way we think about scaling EVM is through rollups, right? You take computation off of the blockchain, and now you can move all that into a private sequencer. The private sequencer can essentially be connected to brokers, and the brokers are essentially just checking for you. They're checking your address, make sure you can sign up and go into this compliant rollup. Once you're in the rollup, you're just like in an EVM, just like you're on Ethereum. You could do DeFi, AMM swaps, but remember, every address has been checked. So we view that almost as like a solution that, when we spoke to the SEC, they said, okay, this is a cool solution that you did with Notary. Can you plug in brokers? Can we get DeFi and counterparty checks in the system? The answer was yes and no. We can't do this with Ethereum, but we could do a roll-up where, if it's opt-in and you give us a no action clause with a use case before a broker, then the broker will work with us on this, and other brokers want to plug in, seeing that no action clause, And this could be a viable solution for the global economy, not just the US or Canada or North America. It becomes wherever brokers want to plug in from, they can plug in. They already have the right checks in place. So that's how we thought about compliance as kind of like a stepping stone towards getting the pass off from governments. And in the end, we know that it will be completely decentralized because the markets will make their choice, but we want to play ball. And in order to play ball, we need to offer solutions for the status quo to be able to be happy that we can still fit within the frameworks of the existing financial ecosystem.
Okay. Hotep Oz, he said, here is a few coins for your pockets. Thanks for putting us all to be better. I just started a new job in high tech. Hotep and Bill. Shout out to Hotep Oz. Enjoy that new job, bro. Best of luck to you. Catch his can, paying tuition. Appreciate you, bro. I think that's it's a pretty good explanation. It seems as though the experts are helping the regulators come to a solution as to what compliance looks like, right? Mm-hmm. Mostly because the regulators don't understand this space. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, they all have dedicated teams, but how do you fit a square peg in a round hole? Like it right. Just, it's either neither here and there. So you have to actually craft up solutions that may get passed off, and that's all you could really do. But the permissionless chain there's no counterparty checks. So first of all, you can't tax this. You could try all you want, but good luck. Like in the long run, people are going to find ways around it. That's the problem we find. We need to, if we are going to support tax and the free open market Western philosophy is going to work, where tax has to pay off where you live. You have to be able to pay off infrastructure. We need systems like this where governments are saying, okay, well, if you're a business, feel free to use a system like this all day, right? And if you're using the permissionless system, please register, and hopefully you're hitting a VASP at some point, and we can track your changes and track your tax. So that for me, that's the major thing. Because if you look at how much money is in crypto now, the market caps, so what is it, like 10 trillion or something like that?
Yeah, something stupid.
That's actually multiply that by 100 by how much effect that has on the existing banking system because of leverage. So I view it's all of the systems around us breaking down aren't a coincidence. It's probably because I can put my conspiracy hat on, but I would say that there's obviously inflation caused because of all of this. If the crypto money hadn't moved back up from the banking system, I would probably say it's okay. There would be no major issues right now.
Yeah. It seems like it increased liquidity somehow.
Well, I mean, once you put that pressure on the banking system, you're kind of in a checkmate mode, because not only your M2 or your M1 velocity starts to fall because there's less money. They have to still pay the bills. You still have to pay the Fed. You have to still raise money through bonds, and if there's not enough, you have to print more. So we will never know the complete picture, but we do know that they had to raise a lot, and a lot of that money didn't actually go into infrastructure. So if it's not going into infrastructure, then where's it going? For me, the multiple rounds of QE, the latest one especially, it's scary to think that these are just patches, and all that money moving into crypto isn't helping for sure. Might even be the instigation, if you really think about it.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Government's using this system. You're saying people can have their taxes paid automatically or accounted for by the government using this blockchain technology, as you guys have created
like if
it?
they were, for example, like if you were to just do a payment system, like if you think about In Africa, in Ghana, there's 400 million people that are mostly unbanked. They barely have phones, but you want to set up a digital economy around there. That would be completely payment focused because that's all they know. Once they get into crypto, then they'll look at DeFi and start doing stuff, but you can't expect them to overnight. So payment focused, you're looking at something like a Lightning Network sort of integration. On the other hand, you can't have it off the leash either, the way that the African central bank will probably not want that. So it's a stepping stone, right? It's a solution to give them to satisfy the existing regulators to get them to actually get into the digital economy. Once they're in there, they're not only solving a lot of problems regarding private key management and maybe some sort of organic key systems that they create, custody systems, all these systems that we'll get for free because the central banks are pretty much putting all the money into it. So it's not like it's extracting value and fighting against public blockchain infrastructure, but it's probably going to be helping. But I view it as a kind of like a necessary evil or a stepping stone to be able to have these people say, okay, yeah, like we get it. This is something we need to join. So how do we get involved? We can't make everything totally permissionless and trustless. But if you are going to get involved in this, let's have a little bit of ground rules. So these are just solutions. We're not saying you have to do this or this is all in our blockchain. This is all you can do. But it's more of, if I'm a regulated entity, I have that option now, and these options of scale are now coming. Whereas maybe in the previous years, you wouldn't have that option. You'd only be able to set up a private Hyperledger instance and trial your digitalization that way. And we all know how that ended up going with Hyperledger, and that it's not really growing too much now with private blockchains.
Okay. Mentioned Web 3.0. As far as I've been studying, Web 3.0 seems to be just a mere marketing term. It's basically like a layer on top of Web 2.0. But you talk about Web 3 versus payments. Explain this concept to me.
Yeah, so Bitcoiners feel like the maxis might feel like the payments of Bitcoin are the core fundamentals of what you only need a blockchain for. If you try to extrapolate beyond that, you not only open up attack vectors, you're misusing what blockchain is actually useful for. And I will argue a little bit against that, seeing both sides, right? I came from the Bitcoin world, but I also studied the Ethereum world in depth to a point where we have to implement an EVM and understand the inner workings. So I saw both. I totally sympathize with the maxis saying that, and it's kind of true right now, but it's not. I don't think it's going to be true in the future, in the short term. One, because we figured out scale with EVM, and two, once you figure out scale and people are using this DeFi ecosystem, and you close some of the attack vectors with smart contracts, then you start to see a new economy or even a new value system emerge. For example, like you have LP tokens, and you use that to act as a debt to borrow from to create a new smart city initiative from a DAO. This is eye-opening stuff. You're using your own money, you're creating debt from your own money by locking it up, and the loan is being paid off by itself through DeFi. So you don't have to pay it off, and you're borrowing money to build your smart city initiative that's going to funnel that value back into the DAO to create a flywheel effect. This coupled with a whole array of different DeFi use cases creates kind of fungibility across DeFi in a way that just isn't possible with payments. And what I mean by that is, like, you have debt in this DAO, and then you have LP tokens somewhere else doing something else. You have lending and borrowing, and all those things can correlate each other because the contracts can talk to each other, and you have a new value system created out of that. Maybe that's what money ends up being. Like, I want to pay with my LP token to you for coffee. Sure, it's scalable enough. Why not? So that's why I think, Web3 has a life of its own. However, I would say that right now it's immature, right? The smart contracts, they are not secure enough. They open up a lot of attack vectors. The cross composability of smart contracts is an issue. So what we are trying to do as an industry is create those factories and templates so that you can use Lego blocks and build on top of those. So that's the idea is try to have a safe, sound Lego block infrastructure for smart contracts, and then people build the value systems through Web3 on top. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. So when you think about Web3, you're talking about Web3 as far as payments are concerned.
No, I'm talking about like in Bitcoin, it's all about payments, and in the EVM world, it's all about Web3 and more than just payments. You could do
What is
payments
Web3?
The technical term is it's a semantic web or interconnection between devices that can communicate autonomously without human interaction. That's a concept before even Ethereum came out. But the fact that now you have a autonomous financial system that plugs it in, the Web3 concept, which was born from Web 3.0, kind of took off on its own. And it makes kind of, because it's autonomous and there's a decentralized public ledger backing the actions of each agent in the system, it kind of makes Web3 possible. The actual Web 3.0 term that has an actual RFC in the web world attached to it. So, Web 2 was just like data-driven apps and web apps, maybe WebSocket and push apps. But Web 3 is the autonomous communication between them, relating finance, and as well as, what Ethereum is showing is attaching it to a public blockchain ledger for ultimate security. Like you Google Web 3.0, it predates Ethereum, right? And
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very familiar with that. Just having a hard time wrapping my mind around the fact that this is in fact something different. It feels to me as being much of the same, except we're giving it names like autonomous, right? Like, is it really autonomous? I mean, we've given it a function to carry out. How much of this functionality of the machine is autonomous? Or is that just a fancy term?
I mean, are you going towards like, okay, MEV attacks and this sort of thing where actually miners can dictate order events, and how autonomous is it if they can decide that? Or are you saying like the contracts themselves and they're not actually autonomous because it requires human input to trigger a transaction or something like that?
Yeah, that's more along the lines of what I'm saying.
Yeah. So when you create a transaction, you're triggering something. You have to pay some gas.
Yeah.
But the contract can actually talk to another contract. So it's just a standard, say it's a C++ program that talks to another C++ program.
Right.
That's all it really is. And we're calling it autonomous, but
right.
It is really a triggered event where multiple systems end up creating a ripple effect of actions that really, so you're right. It's not like a complete Turing, complete set of actions that AI driven or something like that.
Right.
It's more someone needs to do something and then it cascades down into a bunch of things, and how you code it up might mean that events are triggered. And it's just an event queue that gets created. And Ethereum is just a massive event queuing mechanism and replay system. Really what it is.
Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. That makes much more sense to me. I think we touched on this earlier. Actually, no, we didn't. We didn't touch on DAO now. DAO. Walk people through what this DAO is. We kind of just touched on it just now, right? A bit of the autonomous organization pieces.
I didn't buy into it when the first DAO came out, right? I thought it was like you were saying, it's a bunch of bullshit. Like, what is this? Like, how can you have every single action dictated on the blockchain? Um, and the current DAOs are pretty BS, I would say, especially voting and governance based ones. Like, oh, I can just buy up all the tokens, and then the treasury is worth $5 billion, and the token value I can buy 60% of them for 2 billion. Therefore, I just made $3 billion because now I could vote myself all of the allocation or something like that, right? And that's what Andre Cronje is like the father of modern DeFi, which just left the ecosystem. Said that he's like, get away from governance tokens, get away from systems where you're trying to pool treasury for the good of everybody, and then create speculative tokens on top. Because that really, you're trying to do a ponzification of a treasury, and that doesn't work, right? Like you can see that in game theory sense, it's going to break at some point when the incentives are big enough. We took that concept and we said, what if we could just maybe it's not even a DAO, but what if you could just remove the speculative token angle, remove the governance angle, and you simply just take your own position and borrow against it, and you use the DeFi market to help cover your position over time, and you isolate opportunity cost as your risk to do a venture, because you can have these, quote unquote autonomous contracts that you can write any type of code for. You can do things like, I want to reach into a contract to make sure it's an LP token, so it's a Bitcoin to USDT pairing, which gets put into the contract, and then I could turn around and I get a receipt of that. I could do a digital signature saying I own that LP token. I'd like to take debt based on that. And the contract will index that debt completely because it tracks who's taking debt and who has LP tokens. And then you could turn around and venture that out to yourself to sell that debt back to BTC, and now build a smart city initiative. And you're actually paying somebody in BTC or wrapped Bitcoin at that point. That is a sort of idea we're coming to about if you have a layer one foundation, like a layer one with a foundation behind it. We think that most of these layer ones, they're sitting on treasuries. How can you actually keep your war chest? How can you keep that growing? And how can you grow your ecosystem sustainably? With a concept such as this, we think it's a pretty powerful concept, because not only does you're only playing with time value in our case, the only risk is time value. There's a small risk that the contracts are unsafe and funds can be stolen that way. But assuming that we build the Lego blocks in a safe way, the risk there is time value. And with a treasury such as layer one, like say if we put $20 million into that, we are growing the ecosystem knowing that the money will be made back, and we'll take that 20 million and we'll do it into something else. But we are also creating a flywheel effect, growing that ecosystem, knowing that anytime we put money into it and anyone else puts money into it, the vision is to create value for that ecosystem. And we feel like most of these EVMs, the layer one foundations, will probably be guided with this sort of concept. It's not what a DAO is today. Maybe it's something new. But this sort of thing is pretty powerful, and it's because of the fact that you can code up stuff in the DeFi world and leverage open positions out there, leverage liquidity out there in a way that is done through consensus, right? It's not P2P. You don't need to have game theory on the fact that someone could say, no, that's not your value anymore. It's all driven by the EVM. And so you have consensus. So you can do things like, I can lock up my LP tokens and trust that no one can take those tokens away. And then I could borrow against that and then venture that out to pay someone in a multi-sig. So that is a new concept, and it's kind of foreign, but we're using that and running with that as an idea behind the layer one of our foundation to create that treasury and create ecosystem growth through that. It's kind of, I know it's kind of weird, but the way I see it,
it's not weird. They've been doing this since ancient times.
Yeah. I mean, the way I think about it is, if this idea takes off, it's almost like the Red Queen race that I alluded to, a Bitcoin, hyper Bitcoinization, where corporate finance is disrupted. Like, why do you need corporations anymore when everyone could just reach out to a DAO? The only risk is time. There's no credit party or there's
Agency.
there's no third party risks here because I don't have to pay back the loan. It's purely Sharia compliance, and like UAE, they would say there's no interest. There's no expectations of interest. You could charge interest, but there's no expectations. So if I just don't build something, you're going to get your money back over time.
Right.
How much time depends on how big of a loan you took out. But in that way, why wouldn't I just go to the DAO? And now I'm in a environment like those websites you go to do work. Those websites where you just say, I'm willing to do software engineering. Please pay me $5 or $10, and I'll build you a logo or something like that. It's a democratized version of that. Why do I need a position in a corporation if we could do something like that? I don't know. Can it get that big? Maybe not. But that's the idea.
So this is almost as if everybody's an independent contractor of some sort.
Yeah, like any human that wants to provide value in the new knowledge economy, because it's going to be guided by knowledge, right? If you can provide some sort of knowledge or expertise, you'll be worth some money that you can contribute somehow. And as long as there's demand for your work or for your knowledge, there'll be someone willing to pay for that. And you can go and extract rent from that system. And there's no one in the middle between you and that person.
It's pretty fascinating, actually. Pretty fascinating. You're giving me a lot to think about in this interview. A lot of concepts.
No, but you're asking a lot of good questions, though. And actually, it's been really, really awesome because you're digging in and you're asking hard questions as I go as well. Yeah.
Well, I'm just trying to understand, right? Okay, so explain this. You have modular blockchain and monolithic blockchain. I mean, the names sort of tell us exactly what they are, right? It says here, if we were to start from scratch, what kind of blockchain design would you build? I mean, obviously, if I'm looking at this from a common sense perspective, maybe modular sounds like the way to go. What do you think?
So now we're going towards, maybe Bitcoin, Lightning Networks, maybe consider modular, but we're going towards now the EVM, Ethereum side of the world, right? So don't kick me too much, but I'm going to start talking a little bit more on that. I view Bitcoin as the fundamental security blanket of the world, pretty much, for any value. And that's a gold standard. I view Ethereum, what Ethereum did through the EVM, as a gold standard for Web3. And we've already qualified why Web3 could be potentially useful. And if we do think that it'll be useful, one of the problems is, you've actually created a lot of risk by doing the EVM, because now all the transactions are happening and there's more than just payments. So you have CryptoKitties come and the transaction fees go up and the model's broken. It's go home, Ethereum, you're drunk, right? Now we're starting to solve some of those problems, right? We're starting to say, if you're CryptoKitties, maybe you can move off to a layer 2. But why would you move off to a layer 2? Is it the same security? Are we actually Lightning Network security? Are we better? Or are we worse? So we came with Plasma, right? Plasma was an interesting concept where Vitalik and Joseph Poon came to the world and say, hey, you know what? We've solved this crazy problem. We're going to do a bazillion transactions a second. There's no security risk, nothing. As they implemented it, they saw that, there are censorship attacks here. Because what happens is you move your ERC20, which is your, say, Tether USD, over to layer 2, and then the sequencer set, or whoever is creating the blocks on layer 2, they end up screwing off and they go away, right? Now you're stuck, and so there's a time gap of how long you have. They borrow ideas from Lightning Networks because Joseph Poon was a big LN guy. So like, you have time value going back to layer 1, after which, your money's gone. So someone has to do a fraud proof saying that your state is wrong on layer 2. Therefore, everyone needs to move over. Well, what if everyone can't move over in that time because the layer 1 can't support the bandwidth? So there's censorship attacks there. what they came to now and they realize now is you can actually solve some of those problems. What they did was they did optimistic rollups. So an optimistic rollups, what it is you're just essentially copying your blockchain into a layer 2. So you're essentially running Geth on layer 2. But right now they're all centralized sequencers, right? I'm running a supercomputer. You can't scale more than one node, right? That's ultimate scale. It'll be the fastest possible implementation. So imagine I have a Geth node running on layer 2, and it's just crunching transactions. It's getting transactions from people directly through a Web3 endpoint, just like an RPC node. And it's saying, okay, I'll create a block on the blockchain every 5 minutes. And it's crunching up blocks on the blockchain because it's Turing complete, because we can implement a smart contract that simply checks a state. And it opens up a possibility that someone can claim that's fraud. It opens up a new game, right? And that new game is, please give me the Merkle hash or a Merkle root of what the state was of the account and the transactions. That's all you need to do every 5 minutes. You don't need to give me any transactions. The 5 million transactions that happen within 5 minutes, you don't need to tell me about those. All you need to tell me is the Merkle root. But you also need to tell me the data, because I need to be able to reproduce the state in case someone says that's the wrong state. And people say, oh, it's the wrong state because I can prove it. The data of the transactions mismatches. So when you do that, you end up removing the signature checks, and you also compress the transactions. The transactions become a lot smaller. You don't have to represent the whole transaction, just maybe to, from, and maybe a simple check. You can, in optimistic, you have to still check the signatures. ZK came around and says, to hell with fraud proofs. I don't want you to have a mechanism where someone has to always watch. One person has to always watch, because there is a risk there. If someone's not watching, even if the system is wildly popular, and this is scaling to say 10,000 transactions a second, that places a large burden on someone watching, right? Because what if you can't keep up with it? The attack would be, I'm gonna spam the sequencer. It's a supercomputer, and the watcher nodes aren't supercomputers. They can't keep up, and then I'm gonna be able to double spend. But ZK takes it one step further. What ZK does is it says, I'm going to take all the computation and I'm going to create a proof of that. I'm going to check the signatures. I'm going to check the double spend. I'll make sure that you owned some value in that system. And it's an irrefutable proof of removing the computation off of layer 1. What goes on layer 2 is the ZK verifier that verifies that ZK proof. And it guarantees any of the transactions that happen off chain in that ZK prover have been valid. There's no fraud proof needed. So when you think about blockchains, there's 2 components. There's the computation, like a Bitcoin, computing the state to make sure that there's no double spend. And then there's the data required. I need to be able to pull up the UTXO to grab the data to reproduce the computation, to reproduce the fact that there's no double spend, and reproduce the state. Now you've removed the computation off to layer 2. You pretty much said, hey, there's a ZK proof representing all that state. I don't need it anymore in layer 1. You're left with how do users exit? If that sequencer goes away, or if that decentralized sequence system goes away, it gets shut down. How do I move all the value back to layer 1? And that's where data availability comes in. So the data availability is in Bitcoin is now transposed into a data availability problem of censorship resistance of a modular blockchain where people have to exit bad layer 2s or shut down layer 2s, like if government wants to shut it down. So that data availability essentially is just, in ZK, is really compressed. We're talking like 20 bytes per transaction, where it's just an index of from, and a small amount that could represent it in a few bytes possible, because you don't need to do millions of amounts in one transaction. It could be like maybe 10 million is the max you can send or something like that. So it's like 20, 25 bytes per transaction. So that's where we are at kind of now, is representing each transaction through call data, which is much cheaper. It's like putting data in operaturn in Bitcoin. It should be cheaper because it's going to be pruned, right? In the Ethereum world, it's called call data, and we could put the data in call data. It's only 16 gas per byte, so it ends up being a lot cheaper storing it in call data. And the idea
you're actually not creating a transaction. You're actually just recording data of a transaction.
Yeah, just for censorship resistance reasons. That's
Right.
it. The layer one is never going to recompute your transactions, only so people can take their own state by listening to a local node and being able to exit with their own proof, with a Merkle proof. So that's all it's used for. Now, what they're going to do, I came up with this independently, is an idea where you split up data availability in two parts. So data availability is the proof of replication is the important thing, right? It requires consensus. Okay, the sequencer has sent the data around the world. That's all you care about. Has the sequencer sent the right data around the world? Because as long as he sent the right data, and you know that someone has downloaded this and is able to prove to the world that they've got it, and now they can offer that censorship resistance. And so you need consensus around that, right? Because how do you double check the data that's been sent? So they've got a whole bunch of research on that. Like Celestia has a separate project just storing data availability for other blockchains. Right? The problem with that is you're trusting another ledger. The second component to data availability is storage, archiving, right? Archiving requires no consensus. Archiving means I'm storing it. It requires only one copy of the world. You only need, I can store the data of everybody, and therefore the system is secure. I can ask Microsoft, I can put in IPFS, I can put in Filecoin, I can use any system. As long as one copy in the world, same assumption as Bitcoin, as long as there's one copy of Bitcoin in the world and you can sync to it, it's safe. This is the same assumption. As long as someone is storing the data, you've separated the concepts. So what you're doing now is, there's an EIP called 4844, and I coined the term proof of data availability. Is you're creating a transaction where you're sending the data to the network, it's propagating to the network, it's telling the smart contracts through an opcode that, yep, I checked that data, here's a hash. And then the smart contracts are able to say, yes, you can transition the state because the data has been checked. And you simply delete the data after 4 hours, like you prune the data. You're not actually hashing it. You don't have to re-download that data ever. A new syncing node doesn't download that data. It's not hashed into the blockchain. It's simply deleted. Why can you delete it? Is because you've given enough time for the world to hear that that the blockchain blocks have been created and the data has been checked by the consensus of the nodes. You've given enough time for the world to download that data and store it. One person could store it, or everyone could store it. So that actually is going to let us use layer one assumptions to scale the data availability component, which was the last bottleneck. First bottleneck was computation. This last bottleneck is data availability.
It sounds like you built layer two into layer one.
Yeah. And so it's like, okay, now we got layer twos. We figured out the problem. Now let's focus on data availability. How can we use layer one to secure better data availability? Ethereum, if you look at the Ethereum roadmap, they didn't know any of this until recently. So what they did was, hey, let's do sharding. Let's break up the blockchain and make parallel computation possible, and this and that. Very, very complex. I personally think it's not safe, but I'll let the experts of the Ethereum Foundation, think that it's okay. So they didn't need any of that, right? You only need to solve for data availability on layer one to parameterize however many transactions you're looking for. Are you looking for 1 million or looking for 1 billion? How many are you looking for? So in our case, we parameterize it thinking about 7 billion people in the world doing 1 or 2 transactions a year. It's good enough for us, and we need to keep Bitcoin security behind this. We view like Bitcoin security as a thing that's securing all of this, but scaling through this new EVM infrastructure and ZK rollups with data availability solutions, and coupling those together tightly. So in Ethereum, they said, no, let's do sharding. Okay, well, all of a sudden now we got rollups. Well, let's do sharding plus rollups. That'd be cool. Okay, well, now we got this data availability solution that's solving all of our problems. We didn't even need to shard. Well, now let's do sharding plus data availability, when that's going to be super duper scalable, right? So it's kind of going 2 steps ahead, 1 step back, and hopefully 3 steps ahead for them. But I'm a little bit skeptical on adding so much complexity to something that already works. And we've already figured out the bottlenecks, and we're scaling those up. So that's my take on Ethereum main chain as it's transitioning to. We're taking kind of the best of sticking to the Bitcoin philosophy of everyone checks everything, but taking the best of the data availability and the computation stuff and putting that into our system, staying true to the Bitcoin philosophy more than anything.
Looks like you got some fans here. We have a Syscoin Jesus has joined us. And they said, what's the Syscoin equivalent to stacking sats? He says, is it bagging jags or hashtag bag jags?
I mean, honestly, I prefer to be behind the scenes, and I prefer actually to just build and let other people benefit, if you will. For me, it's more about if other people are using this and they're helping, it's helping their lives. That's all. Any builder, that's all they care about, right? You're affecting positive. You're hopefully helping GDP at the end of the day. It's what you're trying to do. So for me, I still view Bitcoin as the ultimate store of value, but there needs to be ancillary systems that are bringing more utility than just payments. And there is a market for value on that. Whether that means you're stacking Syscoin sats, I don't know. I mean, depending on the tokenomics and how you make them, we certainly didn't design Syscoin to be Ponzi-ish. It's deflationary to a point, but we're focused on utility. When you design I don't make this heuristic now as well. Like I would say, when you're designing something that's going to be for Web3 or for smart contracts, you can't design it to be the same deflationary type of system as Bitcoin. It's got to be more utility based, because people have to use this for everyday stuff, not for making $1 million transfer interbank. It's got to be for, I'm making a small DeFi transaction to stake my coin in an interest bearing pool. And that's all I want to do. It's got to be super cheap and fast. So when you're doing that, you have to gear your tokenomics such that it has to stay profitable as a blockchain, it has to stay secure, and then it has to remain cheap enough. So you have to scale enough. So when we designed the tokenomics, it was thinking about that without trying to be overly burdened with Ponzi or deflationary metrics, if that makes sense. I don't want to step over the line and say, we should be more deflationary, less Ponzi. But for us, we try to think about in 50 years when our kids or grandkids are trying to use the system, they shouldn't be priced out. They should all have the same sort of utility as what we're trying to extract from that system, if that makes sense.
Indeed. Syscoin Jesus says, can we use Syscoin to create an anarchist utopia in the metaverse?
Yeah. So, Dan Bonet said this. He said it perfectly. He said, every time we scale, so he's, I think he's a Stanford professor. Every time we scale 5 or 10x, you get 50 to 100x use cases that we've never thought about before. And I would say NFT, metaverse, these are very rudimentary early day type of initial use cases of EVM, because it can't scale too much. They've hit the wall. But when you're going to scale up 150 to 100x now, imagine extrapolating that to how many new use cases are going to come out and what that means for existing metaverse or GameFi. You have like Activision and Relic, these game companies are going to jump in, slap on an AR and VR. Now you got like an actual metaverse where you can't tell reality from AR VR anymore because the graphics are so crazy. And then you put your NFTs in there and you add in, instant transactability. You've got the makings of something else, right? Maybe smart cities or something. That's where I think it's going to go. It's right now, it's really early. We're still in, I guess, use case discovery. And once we scale up, we're going to get a new discovery period where someone in India is going to figure out there's a new $1 billion idea because it's cheap and fast enough. I can implement it. It's not going to cost me anything, just my own imagination. And I come up with all these cool concepts. Those people are priced out today because of fees and the blockchains aren't fast enough. And so they're limited in how imaginative they can get.
Indeed. What's with this interplanetary blockchain? How to scale modular blockchain to Mars?
This is, I met someone in Dubai that was local to me. She went to one of the universities, and then she connected me to a businessman here that mines quite a big operation, Bitcoin mining. They have a interesting use case. Actually, like I learned that SpaceX is actually modeling out Mars colonization in digital form right now, and that is something that's going to happen. I don't know if it's our lifetime or maybe the next, but the idea here is they actually have a space in Dubai, 20 square kilometers, to do a physical colonization of Mars, and that means digital currency as well, right? So everything like oxygenation and gravity and all that stuff that has to be factored in. Basically, building the prototypes as an exhibit. Let's say it costs you like $500 to go check it out, but they're going to actually make money off it. But the government mostly will, because
they're going to build Mars on Earth,
right? And that's a one-to-one, pretty much replica prototype, backed with all the CAD drawings, all the researchers and universities and all the stuff involved. Boston, I can't say. I mean, I'm not going to say any names, but really cool stuff. And Elon and SpaceX, they're trying to do this in digital form, and they haven't been doing this in a physical form yet. And what they're missing is they've actually figured out how to scale up the oxygen and the required oxygen needed to survive out there, based on what the gravity and the ecosystem out there, the how much is needed, and based on how many people they can put on there.
Some computational hemoglobin nonsense, yeah. It's just a math equation, yeah. But continue.
Yeah, I mean, there's some real crazy research there. On the blockchain side, though, right? This is where I came in, and I'm like, okay, well, if you really think about it, like, we go back to modular versus monolithic, where you have a monolithic blockchain where everything is on one layer, like Solana, FTM. Some of these blockchains are scaling through layer ones. You can't have that solution. And I'm going to give a QED now that why modular blockchains will win is because if you're talking about you're sitting on Mars, first of all, you want to use the same blockchain. You don't want to create a new blockchain because you won't have the network effects. So using the same blockchain, you have to remove time value from that picture, right? You have to remove time value in terms of if I'm on Mars and I do a transaction and then I go to Earth and do transaction, I could double spend that without anyone knowing because there's a 15-minute lag. And no one's going to sit there waiting for a 15 to 20, 30-minute round trip on Mars to see that you've gone to confirmation, therefore you can walk away. So, the only solution there is to have a localized systems. Well, and you remove time value from the picture. How can you do that? Well, if you have two rollups, like if you have the Earth one and the Mars one, they could be localized and working on their own, and they could be settling on the base layer one independently of time, however often they need. But they're, locally kind of settling transactions in the rollup, just like how we envision optimistic or ZK rollups to work today. So because of that lag in time, you have to think about it. You have to think about solving that in an effective way. There's no solution other than localizing the systems to each jurisdiction. Where, even Visa, MasterCard, you can't have one. You'd have to have the separate ones, and those are centralized. But if you're talking about a permissionless, trustless system that crosses boundaries, you can't have a monolithic chain serving that need. So, that's why for me, it's important to understand that now if they're starting to get into figuring out colonization, that we need to think about these things before we create decentralized systems that can't change or are unwilling to change, like Bitcoin.
Bringing money to Mars, Lord have mercy. That Mars never stood a chance.
I'm telling you, it's closer than you think. Like they're already out there and they're testing things out, and SpaceX is doing digital renditions, and we're thinking about physical already. And I don't know, in a 5-year period, maybe it's built out and we can prove it works. And it does take 6 months to get there, but
surely it sounds plausible. And your solutions that you provide are probably the most sound. It would need to be its own dedicated system. Yeah.
But it's still got to share security. If you don't share security, then that dedicated system is separate and has new attack vectors because it's not borrowing the security of Bitcoin.
You talk about the network effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's pretty freaking interesting actually. I just feel bad for the Martians. Let's talk Syscoin. Let's talk about Syscoin unique value prop, why people should be purchasing the coin, what they're going to be using it for.
I'm not going to tell you why you should be buying it. I mean, I think we're not in a position to tell people that, and that's speculative.
Well, when I say buy, right, like just like I would need to purchase a tire on my car, right?
Oh, yeah,
I need this to get from point A to point B. Why am I purchasing or why am I exchanging my fiat dollars of Bitcoin for the Syscoin? What am I expecting to use this stuff for?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you view Bitcoin as the gold standard of security and the EVM as the gold standard for flexibility or general computation, then you need to tie those concepts together. How we tie them together is we're not borrowing the consensus of Bitcoin, because first of all, we don't think of Bitcoin as a utility or gas. We think of it as a store of value, like we went over at the start of the call. So because of that, we need something that can be thought of without the deflationary or the Ponzi tokenomics around serving the need for utility coin that can be the gas that's not going to be pricing you out in the future. And so Ethereum came up with this proposal called EIP 1559, which is really very interesting. It's a deterministic fee model that burns coins as it goes above some threshold, and under some threshold, the fees go up. And that is an interesting way to create a deterministic fee market for utility perspective. But still, the tokens need to be abundant enough for future generations. And then they need to be deflationary enough for your blockchain to be profitable, so that there's actual security and value there that people don't, you can't attack it. However, we are securing ourselves to Bitcoin through merge mining. So we actually borrow the proof of work, and we say to the miners or the pools, they can actually mine Syscoin for free. We're not creating any more carbon footprint, but we're taking the existing Bitcoin work and we're saying you can mine this chain now as well through auxiliary proof of work. And we're borrowing that security. So we already instantly get that security of Bitcoin. We can minimize a subsidy now because we don't need to make it too profitable, because we're not relying on a whole new proof of work infrastructure. We're relying on Bitcoins. And you create an EIP 1559 sort of framework for the fee market on the EVM. And in doing so, and one thing, we model our inflation based on population growth. So as we feel like as population is growing 1% a year, around 1%, our inflation is kind of modeled after that. And so we view as people come into the world, more people, the supply will kind of adjust accordingly. And doing so, there's less of a deflationary effect, but more of a utility-based perspective on why you need Sys. So now, yeah.
No, go ahead, finish.
And so now you would use Syscoin to do your smart contracts or pay for settling on that ledger, knowing that there's the Bitcoin security behind each and every settlement as well.
Interesting. So basically what you have here is the security of Bitcoin with the advantages of Ethereum. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean that's the rough idea, but it creates a whole new system on its own. But we are trying to tap into the two gold standards and scale in the way that Ethereum is trying to scale through modularity, minus some of the stuff they're trying to do with sharding and stuff.
So we're actually dealing with an inflationary currency, not a deflationary one, right?
Yeah, it's based on inflation, but if the use, if it starts to, like, imagine the blocks become full, at times it will become deflationary, right? It will be because of EIP 1559, there is a burning model built in. So it does have that concept of during peak times, more coins are burnt than minted. but over time, we hope in the model that we are growing with the population at least, so that we're not pricing those people out, that they have equal and fair opportunity.
Now, what about the lizard men who are working on population control, and we are seeing a decline in population? Is the tokenomics going to follow that trend as well?
I mean, those are set, but I do view that, for example, if we colonize Mars, it's going to be another boom of population. If we also, I do see the percentage of population falling. It was like 2% a decade ago or something. Now it's like 0.7% or 0.8%, depending on which models you look at. But it's just the sheer number and the absolute amounts is so staggering that the percent is obviously going to drop. So there also is some research that people are actually not going to live as long. Is going to go backwards, like, people not living as long. But just based on what the extrapolation of the chart is showing us, we are at about 1% and falling. So in the same way, our inflation is around 1% and falling, and it caps out to some really small amount, like 0.1% or something like that. That's when you have the full deflationary effects of the block subsidy falling all the way to zero. We do stop the blocks subsidy from going absolutely to nothing. Mm-hmm. We stop it to some amount because a nice to have, if you were to create a new blockchain, would be to pay full nodes to run full nodes, right? Mm-hmm. This Vitalik's been talking about this forever. Is you'd love a developer fund, or you'd love a full node incentive fund. That means that at some point you want, what we have is a masternode system where you're paid to run as a full node, and they're paid a block subsidy, right? We stop the block subsidy at some point, some very nominal small amount, but it just stays static at that point. Mm. And that means that these people running full nodes will not have to fall back to fees in the future. They'll know that they have some of that subsidy long term always coming in, so they'll always want to run that node system. Mm. And they're not going to say, oh, you know what, after some amount the fees are not high enough, therefore I'm leaving. The blockchain is not profitable anymore. Mm. It's not a situation like that, because they're actually still earning some small reward. It's still it's a small amount, but it's still actually depending on the price, it could be pretty profitable still.
If I were a tech geek, I would be like, oh yeah, this sounds like a great project. But as for the commoner, truck driver, just trying to live his life, how does Syscoin fit into his life? How does Syscoin benefit him? I mean, he's not trying to colonize Mars.
As you know, like, the devil's in the details with this stuff. It's like there's Bitcoin, then there's Ethereum, and there's now Ethereum post-merge. We don't know, like, the intricacies of every single angle of every single line of code and how it's going to react. And so the devil's in the details, and we feel through our research, we've created kind of a happy medium of both systems, which takes the best of what we learned since the beginning of Bitcoin, and take the best of what we learned since the beginning and up to date of Ethereum, and kind of put those together, thinking that, we're friendly to Ethereum, but if Ethereum has issues with their sharding or proof of stake, for example, proof of stake, if it's, is it actually secure? Is it secure in hyperinflationary environments? I would suggest not. If it's not, then there is a viable alternative there that we know is going to be secure and is going to scale. It may not be, because they've taken those trade-offs with sharding, it may not offer the same amount of data availability. But for us, we've parameterized it so that millions of people can use it, so billions of people can use this. It's good enough. At some point, it's going to be a little bit higher cost due to the fact that there's you're using Bitcoin and using less data availability, but it will be more secure.
Is Syscoin money?
Honestly, I don't know the answer to that, because I don't know how it's going to be used in a global system. I would say, like I was saying, in DeFi, we have fungibility across DeFi, which is a whole new concept that's going to be sped up when we have scalability, when we have the actual ability to make cheap, fast transactions. That itself may become money. because that if I'm a user, I'm going to be in DeFi, I'm going to be staking something, I'm going to be borrowing something, I'm going to be lending something, I'm going to be in a DAO, I'm going to be earning money. I should be able to take any of those positions and just flip them to somebody else for barter. Maybe that's the new money. Like, it doesn't have to be one currency, because you can agree that the system tells you there's value and it's worth this much. It's worth this much DAI or gold or whatever. I don't know. Maybe that becomes money. But for me, it's an open book on, in the new world, what money really is, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to sink my teeth into this thing and wholly understand on how it fits into just my everyday life. You know, how can I use this thing? It's not a store of value. It's not money. So right now, to me, it's just like colonization of Mars coin.
It's more about, like, if you to optimize a use case for creating a secure smart contract platform that's going to serve your needs for business, for development, you're not going to be priced out.
So this is a commercial tool.
It might be an
enterprise tool.
Yeah, it might be, because businesses, that's all they care about is, in 10 years, I got to know that this thing is going to be still efficient enough for me to build on, right? And maybe commercials today might be the large dApp developers of tomorrow. It's really for them. That's what I think the goal of Ethereum was, that too, global supercomputer, right? But in the way the tokenomics and all that stuff, people started thinking about it as a speculative vehicle to make money just on itself. So I'm trying to reset that button and say, let's rethink kind of the original ethos of what we're doing here as a general purpose computer, and solving these problems and bringing a whole bunch of value, right? Yeah.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Jag. I love that name, Jag. It just seems very masculine these days. Really, really cool name. I hate the fact that people run out and they buy new coins and they have no idea how these things fit into their lives. I would say if somebody is going out and they're purchasing Syscoin at this point, and they're not, utilizing the smart contract functionality or anything like that, essentially what they're doing is they're investing in the idea and saying, I believe at some point a planet somewhere out there in outer space may be using a system like this to handle their transactions. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, Interplanetary is just one of those things that
just one of those,
becomes
just one
possible,
example.
But it's almost like worldwide adoption of DeFi and general purpose computing. Even like once you get into ZK, like think about this. Matter Labs is doing something called LLVM, which is like an intermediate layer in the coding world, like Rust, C++, Go. They're doing a ZK prover of that system, right? Which means you can compile any programs into LLVM and run it in a deterministic way in the Web 2 world. Like, they're doing this for smart contracts, but you can use it for any program. So imagine, like, I can create a marketplace through smart contracts and say, here's a program. I'll give you $5, run the program for me and get the weather forecast of today and dump it in this database. Because that's a program, right? The program has to get the query from the weather forecast channel. It has to put the database query inside of this database and give me an endpoint to this URL. The program can't change. So that's like in the Web 2 world, like all of these possibilities start to open up as soon as you intersect ZK with the EVM and you scale up that way. You need something secure to settle all that stuff onto layer one. If you don't have that security on layer one, then what are we even doing? You might as well just use the database. Like if that system's going to break, we might as well just told IBM to stand up a secure database and let's do ZK stuff for them and just trust them. So that's where I'm coming from. Like, it's more than just smart contracts. It's everything, like all sorts of value that gets created, even in the Web 2 context, where people can use oracles or they can do general purpose computation. They can run programs in any way and can prove that they've actually run the program you requested, you have almost a distributed AWS at that point. Yeah, like those are the sorts of things we're thinking about. Now, that's where we're not going to implement those. Those are implemented by the developers. But all we're doing is we're creating that secure infrastructure, the plumbing, the roads for these smart people to take those tools and just build all sorts of value that we never thought possible. And those are just examples of what's possible.
So your target market are those tech geeks at these different corporations and governments.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the stepping stone is governments, right? Because they want compliance. We have those solutions for them. But the end goal is the geeks that are going to be, in their parents' basements, and they're smart, and those straight A kids that don't have social life and just want to go to the basement and program and figure something out, and they unlock a secret that creates a new unicorn tech. Those are the guys.
So what about my anarchist friends who are like, they hear, oh, this guy is working with the governments for compliance? How do you put us at ease?
Those are opt-in, right? This is not something we're doing on the base layer that's going to say everyone has to use that. We're creating the tools so that they can opt in and use it if they want. So in the example of the roll-up, right? The roll-up is actually something that users can decide if they want to go to that system or not. They're opting in by saying, okay, let me go to the one that's endorsed by the US government and use DeFi on there. You're going to have to go through a check. It'll say, please log into this broker, set yourself up, and then you can come into the system and you'll be registered. It's completely opt-in, and we're letting the market dictate what it wants to do. We're giving the option for the government to say, we can solve these problems in a way that doesn't require complete disruption on your system, but allows your users or the people to operate safely. And if the market decides this is not what the market wants, then ultimately we've given it a good run, and you've tried your best, and you just can't force it. You can't intervene in the market. It's going to decide on its own what it wants. But if it does end up becoming widely used, because that's what the Fortune 50 companies need, they want to ensure that safety, then maybe it's used for quite a few years before we have the safe smart contract Lego blocks that don't have the attacks anymore, and the degens doing rug pulls and all that sort of stuff. You remove those sorts of things. You have the apps that detect rug pulls before they happen, then the companies will be perfectly fine building on the public permissionless layers. But until then, they're going to want some sort of safety for their users, right? And the option of a private blockchain isn't on the cards anymore. The public blockchain, this is the best you can do, is a public blockchain roll up that's completely compliant, but you're opting in for your users.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Jag, people should connect with the Syscoin project at syscoin.org. I believe is the correct URL, right?
Yep.
And if they want more information, should they go there? Is there a dedicated YouTube channel? Should they take down your cell phone number? How should we go about doing this?
Any or anything. Just I'm always on the Discord there or Telegram, and I'm probably on about 14 hours of the day, and I'm around to chat with anyone who wants to get building or wants to learn more. We're all passionate about this stuff, so hopefully it strikes somebody who is a builder that wants to dive in, and we're all ears. We're offering the incentives for people to get building, and I feel like we should be doing it as a team. So even if you're from another ecosystem, we love to share thoughts on how we're solving DAOs and how we're solving the complexities of design through layer 2 and modular design. And maybe you're from Solana and you feel like layer 1 is the way, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too. So I'm always just open, and I'm on Telegram and Discord, and we have our YouTube channel as well. So we do post some stuff on there. Just looking for people to connect, and we're always there. On LinkedIn, I'm on there too, but most of my thoughts are on probably Twitter. So I put all my stuff on Twitter.
Who is the ideal mind you would like to connect with? If you could construct what that person looks like, an avatar of some sort, of the perfect person you would love to see grab a hold of Syscoin and put it to good use? What does that avatar look like?
I really like Andreas Antonopoulos.
Okay.
I think he has a good framework of understanding of the original ethos of Bitcoin, and then he got into ETH after that. I think he understands both models, and he would sink his teeth into the fact that there's this system that combines the best of both. Yeah, and then the way he's able to stand in front of regulators and explain succinctly what it really is, so they get it. Really is a model for the public speaking side and explaining it properly. Yeah, I mean, I'd love for someone like that. And the other side, I'd love to meet people on the government side as well, and these people that need to learn about it, need to learn about how this solves real world problems. And that's our next immediate step, is to go and start meeting these key people, to explain to them that, okay, if you need compliance, we can solve that, but this is what public permissionless blockchain is all about. And maybe there's a misconception you have, and we're here to clear that up.
Indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another wonderful, Sharpe conversation. This is Jagdeep, lead developer over at Syscoin. This conversation will be on SoundCloud, Spotify, etc. Make sure you tune in on Apple Podcasts as well. And leave a positive review. We definitely appreciate the feedback. I'm Hotep Jesus. Jag, stick around for just a moment as I close out the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Hotep and Bill.